If you're an instructional designer looking to make your training more strategic, scalable, and aligned with real-world outcomes, this episode is for you. Today, we're talking with David Shafer, a seasoned training expert with deep experience in higher ed and aerospace. From managing large-scale training programs at Boeing to teaching future trainers at Tarrant County College, David brings a unique perspective on what it takes to create training that actually works. We'll explore practical approaches, common mistakes to avoid, and where the field is heading next. Welcome, David. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. This is very exciting. I like being back. I appreciate you asking me back.
Well, it's a good thing you're here. And I have wondered about how this program of yours was going to turn out. I got to be honest, because it's so important to me that we get these programs up and running. We get them managed and taught by professionals like you, and we set the seeds for the next generation of instructional designers. And I saw the struggles that you were going through, and I thought, this has got to work. He's got to get it going. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So I would love to just start out talking about the Tarrant County College and your experience with that, what you did with the program, how it's going, because I think that's really going to be valuable for those viewing, the instructional designers out there, the trainers. I think that they're going to be just as curious as we are about what that journey looks like.
Okay. I appreciate that. I'll give you a quick little history lesson about Tarrant County College and all the different delivery systems they've had in the past. When I first started teaching there, we had a LMS that was called LogiCampus that was built by the school. And it was very primitive, very old, but at the time it worked out well. These courses were delivered either in person or online. But with campus, I'm trying to incorporate more synchronous with it. However, I do know the students all come in believing it's all asynchronous. So scheduling wise, it can be a challenge. But I've noticed that the courses that I do try to bring that into seem to have a stronger bond. There's a better cohort of students with that delivery.
Yeah, it's true.
So the momentum got lost right around COVID, I believe, 2020. A lot of things obviously changed at that point. And so I was teaching, I'm always taught as a moonlighter, and the need dropped off around then. When I look back at that and I contacted my previous dean and asked her where the program was and if I could come in and start teaching again. And she said it's on a hiatus at this point, and they weren't not sure they were going to bring it back. And so I just said, okay, that's fine. I put it in my calendar every 3 months. I would contact her and ask her about it. I contacted her. I went back and looked at my email after I got brought back on this most recent time, which is about a year ago. And I think I contacted her 6 or 8 times. And so during the interview, she goes, "So you've been bugging me about this, huh?" I'm like, I absolutely have, because I think this is a very important program. And I want to be teaching, and I want to give this knowledge to people who are in my shoes 15 or 20 years ago.
That's perfect. And I like that you're talking about synchronous, asynchronous, because there are some institutions in higher learning now that won't allow you to do synchronous because they have students all over the world, and they don't want to have students say, well, I couldn't get to that because it was 3 a.m. And I really think that's a problem for some of us, because I really like synchronous. I always have office hours. I always have opportunities for students to meet with me like that. And I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's an important point.
David, when you're designing training for a high-stakes industry like aviation, what's your starting point, and how can instructional designers in any field apply that kind of mindset?
So when I first get into a new project, I really like to see what existing assets they have, what the program looks like. And then I do some analysis work to see what is missing. Oftentimes, if you're in a program and you've been in the program for years, you lose forest for the trees, right? So you don't know what you're missing. And so the beauty of being able to come in and looking at it from an outside source is to find where the needs and the gaps are in the training, and then ask the questions. They may have all the documents somewhere, and it's just a matter of trying to find the right person who may know where all those archived documents are And sometimes they get lost or missed. And when different systems come in, it seems like every 2 years a new system comes in, another company. And so it's about just deep diving and digging and finding the resources you need. And then if there are no resources, you then put together a plan to start bringing in what is missing and asking the right questions to the right people. I think that's the important thing.
I think that's really important because a lot of people like to downplay analysis. And I think what you're doing is forensic analysis. You're trying to figure out what you had before and how you can make it better. And, you know, this is really important, folks. If you're watching this, remember, you got to do the homework. You got to get in there and dig. And if it's not there, you got to ask questions. And you really need to do this.
Yeah. And I think most times, you really do have to dig. It's not just on the surface. It's not like, oh, here you go, a nice pretty package for you to be able to just start your analysis work from that. You really have to get in there and ask the right questions and find the right people and really dig in and ask the critical questions, the ones that maybe people aren't willing to even answer.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the hidden problems of people that have their silos and they're afraid to give information because then you're going to take their job. And so there's a lot of relationship building that has to come in and just reach out to people, not always with questions and seeking information. Oftentimes you reach out and just see how they're doing, what they're doing, and how you can help them perform their tasks.
I think that's really critical. And what are the lessons learned that you can pass on to new designers? What are the things that we struggle with, that you struggle with, that you think would be important for them to realize that we all face these things? Don't be surprised when this happens. Don't be surprised if someone asks you these kinds of questions.
I think the important part is finding out the right people in the organization you're with, the subject matter experts, as you wrote in a book about that, Chuck. It just recently came out, right?
Yeah. 5th edition came out last month.
So no, the subject matter expert.
That came out in 13. It came out in 13.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So not too long ago. No, I think that's critical information to have is learning who the correct subject matter experts are. Because I ran across a problem when I was with a semiconductor company here locally. And I was working with a specific engineer and we're building out this course pretty knee deep. We were pretty deep into it and we were, 80% done. And then he introduced me to another engineer who also had a lot of faith, and he had a very different philosophy on how the course should be laid out. And it backtracked us quite a bit. So I think it's important to not only know who the subject matter experts are, but who else might need to know information about this. And then to make sure you have the right team, know who your stakeholders are and everything. Now that everything's in flux, so things will come in and things will go out, but you just got to be flexible. I think it's huge as well.
I think that's interesting because if you've never worked with subject matter experts and you have an experience like that, you have a whole different attitude about subject matter experts. And you start to dig in a little bit and say, okay, I need to make sure that I know up front who these people are going to be. Don't bring them in 80% through this process of design.
I think another important part of that learning for me was whenever I did deliver parts of the project, that I would do it in bite-sized chunks. And that way they were not overwhelmed with a 20 or 40 page or slide deck or whatever. And so I would give them a little bit. I'd show them the outline, show them where we're headed and give them a little bit at a time and seek their opinion on it. Now, I think one of the things we professionals need to understand is, yes, there are subject matter experts, but you don't always have to take their opinion or their idea and run with it. Sometimes you can push back a little bit and that's okay as well. I'm not saying you have to be the sage on the stage all the time, but at times, I think sometimes you need to push back because ultimately your program is the one that's going to be implemented. They have great input, of course, but.
Yes. Well, I think it's important with subject matter experts that everybody knows what their role is. And my role as instructional designer, I'm the one that puts all these pieces together. What I need from you is And most of the time they will listen. Not always, but you hope for the best. But I found that confusion among the subject matter experts is the worst thing you can have, especially if they don't have expectations and deadlines and other things. Then they will just do what they're used to doing and won't realize how that fits in the framework of designing learning.
What I'm currently doing with my subject matter experts, where I am now, is we will have an update meeting on Wednesdays, right? And so I'll reach out to him on a Monday and say, this is what we will be talking about on Wednesday. Do you have any updates on what you have? That'll give him a few days to really put something together. And then I also invite him to the meeting if he's not invited to the meeting. He can observe or whatever. And it seems like that relationship is stronger because I keep touching base with them and giving them. I don't ask them for something, in 10 minutes we're having this meeting. That's not fair for them. They're out there doing their regular job, and then they're trying to help me with what we're doing. And so by giving them 1 or 2, maybe even 3 days prep time is enough. And I'll let them know. I said, it's important that I have this information by Wednesday at noon. And this subject matter expert specifically is really good about replying and getting back on me. I don't have to be down that door with them. And I know that's somewhat unusual in the world. So I really appreciate him. Yes.
Let me ask you this. You've been doing this a long time. What advice do you have for new designers? Because there are a lot of new designers out there. And we talk all the time about new gen designers, which are folks that are not going to get a certificate or a degree, but they just want to make their jobs better. So physicians and others that they just want a little bit of information. And what are the kind of things that you would say to any new instructional designer? What are your lessons learned that you think are important?
I think spend the time to really listen to all the different voices that are in the room. Take that information back, discern what is important, and then put together a process. As you continue in your career, you're going to come up with processes that have worked really well, and you can steal and borrow that for each new project. Sometimes it doesn't always work, but at least you'll have a foundation of what to do. And then make sure you talk to those subject matter expert stakeholders about your concept, your idea of what you understand, just to seek clarity. And then once you have the clarity, then you can march on. So I really think a lot of it is just listening to understand.
I think that's terrific because I always say, listen 99, talk 1. And there's no time that's better for that is when you're designing a course and working with people because they have so much to say and you filter out what you don't need, but there's some really good stuff in there. And as a new designer, I think it's sometimes difficult, especially if you've been a teacher or if you've been in a position where you facilitated or managed. You're very used to saying things and people listen and on and off you go. And to step back as an instructional designer and now be in a listening mode most of the time, I think that is something that you have to consciously do. I don't think it happens naturally most of the time.
And I think it's also important to, as you wrap the meeting, to do touch for topics. Do I understand this right? And then follow the 2 or 3 steps you guys just talked about, just to make sure that they completely understand, or that oftentimes you're in your head, the missing bridge points, right? And so you connect the dots yourselves, but they may not have connected the dots. So giving them that opportunity to make sure what is discussed is agreed upon or understood by all.
Yeah. I mean, it really pays to have an attorney mind sometimes. I heard you say, sometimes to be a therapist and okay, so I think you're feeling this now. Tell me.
Looking ahead, what trends in instructional design, like whether it's microlearning, XR, or AI, do you think hold the most promise for improving learning outcomes?
I would lean on, I'm glad you brought up microlearning. I'd definitely lean on the microlearning aspect. I know as a person that will do some quick research on something, if there's something coming up down the line that I need to freshen up on, I know if I go to look on YouTube for a video, I really don't want anything more than 4 or 5 minutes. I really just need a quick little bite-sized chunks of that information.
Thank you for saying that.
I think in the technical world, I think the XR, whether it's AR, VR modalities are going to be huge. I know several companies that I've either worked with or I'm working with that are using these tools. There's a generational gap, right? So I grew up playing specific video games, but not very many, right? And the generation that's coming into the workplace now have been in video games their whole life. And the VR is just almost like a natural step for them. And so as a trainer, you get leveraged, by all means, leverage their skill set on how they see the world through the VR lens. It took me a little bit of time when I had the goggles on to understand what different menus were and how to reach them and stuff, where someone much younger could pick the goggles up and they would be diving around real quick on getting into the classroom. But I also think with the VR learning, I think it can be just a supplement to the instructional led training. It could almost be a flipped classroom situation where they would look at these videos really quick, and then afterwards you go into an instructional led scenario and submit the ideas based on what they practiced in the classroom. And the beautiful thing of VR is that it can be something the subject matter could be something really expensive, very dangerous, very large, or very small, and you're not going to break anything. There's just
it gets expensive when you break things.
It does. Yeah. And so in the world of, say, bricklaying, which is the world that I live in with instructional design for train-the-trainer programs, they actually are bringing in, they have some VR now. They have VR training for bricklayers to learn how to apply and do the different, lay brick to a line and all that kind of stuff without using actual products. They use VR. And so it can be a cost savings mechanism as well. And then I have a friend who has a VR company, Hard Hat VR, and I was just with him at the ATD conference in Washington, D.C. in May. And it's just fascinating, just the kind of stuff that can be done with VR training in preventing costly mistakes, but also preventing life-altering mistakes. And it's such a way to be able to save lives while you're training, because they do some pretty technical things, that very scary things. And I've actually tried on the headset and I fumbled like you can't imagine, because the most I delved into, I guess, video games as a kid was Miss Pac-Man. So this just seems like the next subset, the next evolution, just a great way to train.
Well, the thing for instructional designers to remember is the point at which people came into technology. And I talk about this a lot, or write about it. This notion of what technology have you not lived without? So if you go back to me, it's television and radio. But you look at this generation, and there's never been a time where they didn't have social media, where they didn't have video games, where they didn't have VR, where they didn't have AI. And they're now used to that. They don't think much about it. And as you go up the age ladder, here you go. Okay, you got me, you got Denise, we got you, David. Everybody's at a different place with the point of where they took off with technology. And for designers, you really have to think about this, because, yeah, there's all this new stuff coming in, but you still have a lot of populations that aren't having this as second nature to them. And they will still struggle with these things. We have to be aware of it.
And I think it's important that I will use myself. I will use my limited experience with VR and whatnot, and remember that the learner coming in may be in the same generation and will be struggling with the same things. And how can I build something in that environment that will be intuitive for them, yet I don't lose that kid who's 19, who's done this for his whole life.
And that's what I like so much about microlearning, is the learner can pick and choose. Go into it where they feel comfortable. And I think that's the way of the future personally, but what do I know? David, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. Thanks so much for being part of this. We're going to have you back for sure. And I am so proud of the fact that program's up and running and that you've kicked it in the rear end a little bit and you're teaching it and doing all great things. And thanks so much for being part of us.
Thanks so much, David. And thanks so much, everyone, for viewing this video and sticking with us here. If you have any questions for David, please drop them in the comments, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. Thanks again for tuning in.